Welcome back, everyone. I'm excited today to share with you some of the hot off the press research and technology that we've been developing here at UCSD and in the Center for Cyber-Archaeology and Sustainability. And I'd like to open by just sharing a little bit about my background, because it may give you a little bit of understanding of where we're going to go with this. So I did my PhD here in archaeology, traditional archaeology, with Tom Levy as my advisor. And at the near end of my research, in my doctoral research, I asked the question, there's got to be a better way to study ceramics than the traditional way. There's so much subjectivity when it comes to studying ceramics. And so I thought, what if we applied some type of machine learning model to study ceramics and to create an objective typology? So that means it's a typology based on discriminant analysis and mathematical principles. And that led me down this path of saying, what if we can start applying machine learning, AI, computer science techniques to our ability to better understand not only the archaeological record, but its implications for our understanding of history and especially of the Hebrew Bible. And that led me down a new route in my career of going into what Tom Levy and I like to call cyber-archaeology, and I'll give you a definition of that in a minute. But I started out my career after finishing my PhD. I did a postdoc and lived in a Bedouin village for several years. And following that, I actually was hired at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. And it was there that I began to discover what my real passion was. And that was to combine all these technologies together. And one of the core elements of this, and I think Tom introduced this, is using actually game engines to be able to better simulate and understand our real world, our archaeology, our history. And so I was in Saudi Arabia for another 7 years working at KAUST, as we call it, in the Visual Computing Center. And at that time, we began introducing all these new technologies like drones for doing acquisition and 3D scanning. These are some pictures of the site of Madain Salah. And if you guys are biblical scholars, Ancient Dedan is where we did probably the first scan with drones was done in Ancient Dedan. And this is another video of the type of reconstructions we do using this technology. This is actually a much, much later site. This is actually the hometown, the capital city of Riyadh, Ibn Saud's original home that he lived in. And you can see the amazing type of technology that we can acquire and we can scan now with archaeology. And this was just emerging when we had our last EXODUS conference. I returned back to UCSD about 3 years ago and started working here at the Qualcomm Institute and co-directing the Center of Cyber-Archaeology, where our real goal at the Center of Cyber-Archaeology is not just to document and digitize archaeology, but to learn better ways to preserve it, to understand it, and to disseminate it to the world. And so I don't know, Tom, did you give a definition? I missed the first part, but I'm fired, yeah. Here is the definition of how I define cyber-archaeology, and I define it as the convergence of digital, computational, and archaeological methods to study the archaeological record within immersive, collaborative environments. And really this goes back to the idea that the more detail we can digitally document of cultural heritage, the better we can preserve it, the better we can sustain it, and re-examine it. And CCAS is naturally pre-adapted to all these type of synergies that we're starting to see around the world. And we'll get into this more throughout the conference. Here's just some locations of where we've worked CCAS over the years. Of course, in Israel and Jordan, but Saudi Arabia and different areas throughout the region. And here is a picture of Tom with me in Saudi Arabia at the site of Dedan. And what I like to do is show this picture as kind of the vision that we have here at CCAS, and that is to go from cyber-archaeology being a sub-discipline of archaeology to becoming the fundamental component of how we do archaeology, and we bring it into the future. And probably the best analogy is going from your analog phone, your hand phone, to a smartphone, right? So just a little bit of background on what we have been doing with the CCAS for the last several years is we've been building a program that we call Serious Games for Climate Change. So this is looking at even broader topic of not just historical and archaeological areas that we need to preserve, but also the climate as a whole. And in this program, we have students ranging around 30 per quarter, working on multiple projects, archaeological projects, but other projects related to the solar weather, to the nanoscale of technology. And all of this is being housed here at QI. About 2 years ago, actually no, it was 3 years ago, we had this idea. There was going to be a renovation of the Nelson Glick Museum of Archaeology in Jerusalem. And we thought, what if we can make a virtual museum that allows us to allow the world to see what's going on at this small museum in Jerusalem? And especially today, when most people can't even visit this museum, they can still visit it virtually. And so we use all the technologies we had been embracing in cyber-archaeology, such as 3D scanning, photogrammetry, and all these techniques. And we created this amazing museum exhibit of Tel Dan, the museum representing the artifacts, and actually you get to go to the site in Tel Dan. And while we were doing that, we thought, who would be the best person, the best guide to this? And we thought, what about Aviram Biran, who was the archaeologist that excavated at Tel Dan, the archaeologist that discovered the Tel Dan inscription? But the problem was that, unfortunately, Aviram Biran had passed away in 2008. So we actually utilized AI technology from a single image that we had of Aviram to create a fully rigged 3D representation of Aviram. And then we took several of his audio lectures and we trained what's called an NLP AI model to be able to just, you could type in any text and he would be able to speak it with his accent, with his voice and everything. And this led us to think, what if we can start applying this to the way that we communicate and disseminate the archaeological data to this generation? So here's just a quick video showing Aviram talking within the virtual museum. You can see on the right, you can see this museum emerging before you with all of the artifacts and everything. And this is what we started doing about 3 years ago. And we've done a lot since then. One of them is that we thought, let's take an even more historical figure like Gandhi. And we used the same technology to develop a fully rigged, fully avatar-based character of Gandhi that you can interact with, that you could talk to, that you can ask questions to, and tying in, all of you have heard of ChatGPT and large language models, we embedded this all into it.
Please introduce yourself.
And we'll just play one clip of that for you.
Greetings, my friend. I am volcanic talent and Gandhi, though many simply refer to me as Mahatma Gandhi.
And so we began saying, what if we can start looking at these different scales of digitizing our world, both from the whole regional city scale to regional scale to the solar scale, all the way down to the human scale, like making these digital twins of humans. And so we've been doing that for the last several years. At the large global scale, where we took the Digital Archaeological Atlas of the Holy Land, and we converted it into a fully immersive 3D environment that you can fly through the entire state of Israel and Jordan and explore all of the archaeological sites that have been excavated over the last 125 years. We also created what we call a smart classroom to allow people to study and interact with different archaeological artifacts. You can see on the bottom right the scanned Tel Dan inscription. It's upside down if you didn't notice. And we began saying, how can we incorporate more and more data? And so one way that we took that is saying, what if we can not only incorporate archaeological data, but geomorphological data? And this section that we're in is all about the geoscience. So I'll just show you a couple slides on this. You'll learn more about this later. But we began taking all the geoscientific data that we had working with Gilad Steinberg and Tom Levy and others, and we began to visualize it inside of the Unreal Engine. And so this video right here that you're seeing is we're actually pulling back time, removing different layers of stratigraphic deposition over the last 10,000 years, from the Epipaleolithic period up to modern times. And every time that you click on a different point of time period, like the Neolithic or the Iron Age, you can see what that landscape like. And you can see that the water has been rising over these years. The terrain has changed. Now it's a marshland, roughly in the Iron Age period or right before the Iron Age, and so on. And so we can begin using Unreal Engine and these visualization techniques to not only incorporate all of our data, but also be able to explain it and visualize it for everyone to see. Here's another video that I was working on related to Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia has 3 UNESCO cultural heritage sites. This is one of them. This is the city of Al Balad, and they have these very amazing cultural heritage preserved houses. And so we took all that technology and we created a virtual tour of the house where you can actually have a digital avatar with all the technology we've been developing take you through that tour. And you can ask the avatar questions and they'll take you through it. And we began adding garb that's traditional to the time period that these houses were built. And that leads us up to today. Today, Tom and I actually in the last several quarters, working with students, we said, what if we can create the Museum of Future for the Exodus? And can we develop a gamified museum, meaning that you can put on a VR headset, you can walk through it, and you can explore and learn about the Exodus in VR. And we thought even better, let's actually embed it within the very room that will have the physical museum. So tonight, when we have the reception, we'll open the museum and you'll get to experience in VR and physically the Museum of the Exodus. So this will be our second museum following the first year's Exodus Museum. And we have several results that I wanted to just quickly go over and show you, embracing this latest technology. So one, Shasu nomads. So there's a lot of different theories on who were the Hebrew people, the Israelite people. Were they Amorites? Were they Shasu? And really there's very few depictions of these different groups that we have. But we do have some amazing murals, and all of you that are very familiar with the story of Joseph and the multicolored coat, this is something that has been realized, is that the Amorites and the Canaanite type people, they wore these very beautiful and decorative clothes, and we see this in Egyptian depictions of them. If you look at what we know as maybe the only real mural of a Shasu non-slaved Shasu nomadic Bedouin, you can see one on the right. So this is from one of the murals that we have. And so what we did is we took those murals and we started to say, can we take all of these images and actually create 3D cloth, real cloth, like the way that you would stitch it and sew it together. And so the video that you just saw there of the clothes is actually those cloths actually being created into 3D interactive physics-based clothes. And I think this really highlights something I want to talk about in this presentation, is that this is a new way of doing experimental archaeology. We're now at a stage where we can use these technologies to actually make inferences and deal with the problems that we've kind of glossed over in our study of the archaeological record, or even the study of Exodus. Really, when we started thinking about how do we dress the Shasu nomad, we had to figure out what part was the cloak, which part was the kilt, and so on. And so here is the results. So here you can see we have 2 Shasu nomads. On the left is a Shasu nomad, and then on the right is an Amorite. And if you look closely, you may recognize that face. If you look closely, it's you, Tom. Yeah. So we actually scanned Tom's face a couple of years back. And so I thought, who better to represent a Shasu nomad than Tom Levy? So going beyond that, we wanted to also try to model the different trade routes that we know of for the Exodus. And so in the museum, what you'll get to see is actually this demonstration here. So in the museum, you'll get to walk through the museum and see different elements. And in this video right here, you actually get to see the different proposed routes that the Exodus would have occurred. And one thing, it's going back to the idea of experimental archaeology, as I began to really look at these routes, it's very clear that they're cutting straight through mountains. They're cutting through ways that the Israelites, or maybe just the segment of the Egyptian, of the Israelites passed through. They definitely couldn't have passed through this way. And so this really is an opportunity for us to begin to really explore, now that we can combine trade routes with three-dimensional data, to possibly figure out what were the best routes that could have been taken from Egypt into Israel. And then finally, this last video that I'm going to show you is the last stage of what we're working on, and that is we took Steve Ward's work on simulating possible different, here we go, here's the video right here. Simulating different possible, here we go, yep. Simulating different possible explanations for the flood. And so this one you're going to see, for example, the volcanic eruption around Santorini. And you can see it here in 1 second. Yep. And so we've taken that 2D data that was represented as images, and we converted it into full 3D transformable meshes that can represent the change in terrain, the elevation, and everything of the data. And you'll get to see this in the museum. And then finally, we've also been modeling how exactly would you do a splitting of the Red Sea, of the Reed Sea, right? And so here you can see some videos of us experimenting with different techniques, actually using physics to separate and to recollapse the Red Sea. And then finally, this is just a close-up of just the area from that Santorini tsunami hitting, flying out, coming all the way from Crete, all the way hitting the coast of Egypt right here, and you can see that giant tidal wave forming and emerging. So with that, I just want to thank you and encourage you to come and check out the amazing work that we are doing here in CCAS and throughout this week at the museum. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. So we have about 5 minutes for questions.
And answers. Yeah.
Start with the answers.
Yeah.
So where do you see the research going now with your students from computer science and engineering?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my talk, that really I see that we can really apply simulated or digital approaches to experimental archaeology that hasn't been explored before. Trying to find the routes of, for example, the Exodus. We know that there's a physical limitation to the ways that they could have passed through. We have ideas on certain known waypoints of where they stopped, and we can use that to actually try to simulate and calculate the actual most natural paths that would have got from one place to the next. That's just one example. I think also exploring clothing, exploring the fabrics and the things that we found through archaeological excavations and applying that to this digital experimental archaeology. I think this will be a very exciting path that we can take within our group. Yes?
There is an alternative theory that at least the Israelites or part of them came from northern, what is today northern Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't incorporate that into whatever the Exodus and.
Yes. So I didn't incorporate the one assuming that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. Yes, I was mainly relying on data from other archaeologists' routes. So most of the archaeologists that will be presenting today, they've actually published over the last several years or the last 20 years their suggested routes. And so actually I was showing their routes, not routes that have been more popular in the last year or so. Yep.
Maybe one more question?
Actually, it's more like a comment. Maybe if you put the Saudi Arabia route, you'll get more hits on your Museum of the Future. Because a lot of people, the Arabs, Muslims would be interested.
Yeah, absolutely. No reason not to. It's just one file away.
Right.
Yep. All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Neil.